because it's a jade dragon, and it always has the same 2 antlers on its head that Mushu has.
His face was as the appearance of lightning. It's a thunderbird. It looks like lightning.
The Seraphim. Each one had 6 wings from the age of the 12 dragons.
Priest kings, they were supposed to literally rule the world and enforce the law of nature, which is the Torah.
Daniel met one of the Aniyunwiyah. The concept of a totem pole is in fact Hebrew. Naga goddess mother. Her name was Manasseh. It's your brother, your cousin, your nephew, young Aniyunwiyah, reporting live on behalf of the Great Spirit, Aye, Asher, Aye, to complete your awakening and to let you know that despite what they told you, your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and your law is the truth, not theirs. I want everybody to have an opportunity to comment. However, you can also comment a different way. On this channel, we allow you to create a YouTube short. Any video under a minute is a short. Give us the link to that short by messaging it to the administrator on the Unahia page. The link to the Unahia page is in the description box. And we've also got a QR code for it right here. So you can just go to the Unahia page and give us the link to your short. We'll feature your video in an upcoming video on this channel. Address what you've said. We will be respectful even if you're not respectful.
I've explained before that I'm a journalist, but there will be nothing journalistic about the content in this video. We're talking about beliefs. All of it's purely a matter of faith. Just because some book declares a truth doesn't mean that truth is real, which is the same fundamental issue with the Tanakh, the Bible, the Quran, the Kemetic Book of the Dead, whatever you can think of. We can build a collection of observations that explain why we believe something and why we believe anything in these books to be true. But there's no real evidence that any of these things actually are true. You can't prove to me that a deity or immortal power exists without showing that entity to me in person. There's no photographic evidence of the existence of the Great Spirit or Moloch or Osiris or Thor or Ishtar or Yehoshua, or Muhammad, or Krishna. So we rationally or irrationally choose what to believe in, and what's important is that you don't let society or a master race or your parents choose for you. You exist. Therefore, you need to take ownership of how you choose to make sense of your own existence. That said, many of the things we believe came from non-human sources, if they're real.
I do consider myself to be one of the 2 types of shaman that there are. On one hand, you have the medicine man, and on the other, you have the spirit guide. I am the spirit guide. I am legitimately attempting to guide all of my people toward their ancestral spirits. Shamanism predates religion. I'm not asking you to buy into another religion. When I speak of shamanism, I'm talking about something you don't even have to take part in. See, religion requires you to take part in. When someone who is religious comes into the company of someone who's not religious, there's a clash there because he or she who is religious, oftentimes, especially in the cases of the Abrahamic faiths, say and do things that seem to at least suggest or imply that their religious practices somehow apply to even those who do not observe their religion. Shamanism does not require anyone else to believe what I believe. Not only that, it doesn't even require me to believe anything specific. Religion is about mind control. For you to be saved, you must believe. If your faith is not great enough, the lack thereof will imperil you. No such thing in shamanism. Things simply are the way they are. I have beliefs which I can use to explain how things are to you, but it's completely inconsequential whether or not you believe me. What matters is that you recognize how to interact with the world around you. That's all that matters.
In recent years, you've learned you're Aboriginal, but for some reason you're not interested in the spiritual beliefs that your ancestors observed. You've already learned the law of attraction, so you feel like you don't need whatever your ancestors had. How did knowledge of that law enter into the human consciousness? That's the question. How did the information reach the minds of humanity? It's so metaphysical that we have to ask where this knowledge came from, since we can't rely on the Brookings Institute to provide an expert on the subject. No one interviewed on NPR or CNN about this knows any substantive information about it. Not that you don't already have. For that matter, where did the Hermetic principles really come from? In theory, the Kemetic teachings must come from the same place as the Hermetic principles, right? If you know them both, you already know why I say that. The Tantras, which have to do with the ideal positions from which you can channel your chakras. Most advocates of law of attraction link it to all these things when they talk about it, which means they're convinced that it's rooted in the same sources of esoteric knowledge. That suggests that most of the world's most influential ancient beliefs are all connected, which is something many of you already thought. If they're connected, wouldn't it stand to reason that they're all coming from the same source, or the same few sources at least? Wouldn't that be the logical train of thought here? The Great Spirit, Aye, Asher, Aye, is the source of all things according to your ancestors. Regardless of the nation from which you descend, almost all of your ancestors agreed on the Great Spirit, yet they differed on what other spiritual truths accompanied that concept. I got a video coming to analyze who or what the Great Spirit is from the recent indigenous perspective and the ancient Yatsarali perspective, so that you can see why I and others equate the two. Most of our nations also believed certain generations among them were blessed with prophets who spoke for the Great Spirit too. We had chiefs, we had priests or medicine men, and more rarely we had prophets like Wodziwo of the Paiute, Shemohala of the Wanapam, Kotiakan of the Yamaka, Tenskwatawa of the Shawnee, Skatamek, and Neolin of the Lenape, or Homli of the Walla Walla. All are regarded as past prophets from their respective tribes, and they're Aboriginal nations, and most of them whom I just named prophesied that the ways of the Euro-American colonizers would lead this land to an apocalypse. They advocated keeping the colonizers from taking any more land because they wanted to protect the land from the ways of the white heathen. I'll be doing several videos pretty soon on all of that because, as it so happens, the land is now suffering. The last 2 years have seen historic drought, historic wildfire rates, and a food economy that would constitute famine if its annual crop yield weren't propped up by genetically modified crops, according to a Purdue study analyzing what would happen if you take away GMOs right now. It's pretty extreme. It so happens that Aa Asher Aa prophesied in the Tanakh of the current global food shortage and who would be affected in the Tanakh. And that's a video to come as well. I'll be doing yet another video soon on those whom indigenous peoples considered prophets in recent history. But the point is, I believe the prophecies are connected because they come from the same source through the mouths of the same ethnic groups. That's the key. The Lakota would tell you Wakan Tanka, which is the Great Spirit in the Teton Siouan language. They would tell you Wakan Tanka is the source of all things, all these esoteric ideas as well, and even the source of other spirits like Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds. Some of you are familiar with what Thunderbirds are and some of you are not. Just to recap. Remember, I said indigenous peoples predominantly agreed on the Great Spirit as the source of all things. Christians say creator. It's more like source to our ancestors. It's the same thing. They had differing beliefs. They had differing beliefs about all the other spirits and what their connection was to the source. If they were detached or not, or just parts of the source, all of that kind of stuff. Interestingly, the other spiritual entity most indigenous nations all over North America agreed on, because many of these spirits that we're talking about, they didn't all agree on, they just agreed on the Great Spirit. The one other spiritual entity that they all agreed on in North America, I'm talking about, was Thunderbirds.
Our ancestors acknowledged the Thunderbirds. Many of you could care less what your ancestors believed, what spirits your ancestors interacted with. This is a spiritual world. You don't have to believe that. But many of you settle for discovering your genealogy. If that. Some of you don't even do that work. But you settle for discovering that you're very likely to be indigenous to this land. You don't want to know what your ancestors believe. They had a spiritual enlightenment that this land has not seen ever since they were wiped off the map, because it was stripped from you. You're no longer enlightened. So now what you do at most is you're willing to challenge Christianity. You're willing to challenge Islam, the two greatest religions in the black community here in America. But challenging them does nothing for you, because you free yourself for what? You don't realize how indoctrinated you are. You've been looking for an excuse to not pick up the Bible all your life. And now this gives you that excuse, because the Bible is work. It represents this incredibly massive volume of labor that you never intended to put in anyway. Most Christians who die Christians and were born Christians didn't read it either. But let's keep it real about something. You have to recognize something spiritual exists. Something spiritual is real. And the first confirmation of what I'm saying is in here. You have a spirit. Even if you can't confirm that I exist, perhaps everything around you is a simulation and you're the only real thing here. You can take the solipsist approach, but there is most likely a consensus among all of us that we have our own spirit. I think you believe that. I think you believe that there's more to you than your mind. Your consciousness is too complex. Your ancestors believed that they had encounters with these spirits. Not all of them, just select people at certain times. Thunderbirds is what we're going to focus on. I'll take my own people and use them as an example. Aniyunwiyah, our ancestors believed that they had encounters with entities known as Aniyunwiyah.
And I'll do a video on them too, but they parallel a concept found in the Tanakh. These are angels.
They may not have called them Thunderbirds, but even the Cherokee, which is one of my own ancestral tribes, the one that contributed most to my own ancestry, in fact. Even they had Thunderbirds. They just didn't call them Thunderbirds. Aniyunwiyah were indeed much like these Thunderbirds that you hear of from the other tribes, but they were humanoid and juxtaposed with Uktena. Uktena is more serpentine, yet still having the potential to fly. Uktena could freely come and go to the apex of the atmosphere, which is the heavens. Heavens plural to refer to all the layers thereof. Shaman. And so Uktena could come and go as he pleased, because this is an entity that could fly. A serpent with antlers, a horned serpent, versus Aniyunwiyah, winged man whose wings were feathered. The two are really two sides of the same coin. What the Aniyunwiyah divided in their tradition was united in other indigenous traditions. It was far more common among the tribes that are known for these Thunderbirds to depict them as more bird-like, but then having the features of other animals that were not human. Aniyunwiyah are just like those Thunderbirds. The only difference is that the animal whose features dominated, besides a bird, was the man, the human.
Audubon.org, rulers of the upper realm, quote, beyond Sioux beliefs, Thunderbirds permeate the spiritual world of widespread native groups, including the Ojibwe of the Great Lakes region, Tlingit of the Pacific Northwest, Pawnee of the Plains, and about 24 other tribes. A database of ethnographic records collected by anthropologists includes roughly 500 references to Thunderbirds in documents describing native cultures of the Americas, sometimes translated as Thunderers or Thunder Being. The spirit's particular attributes and stories vary by tribe and even family line, but certain qualities transcend cultures. Thunderbirds are generally depicted as birds of prey or avian-human hybrids, such as a person with beak and wings. Some images present the figure chest forward, head in profile and tail feathers parted, as if they were human legs. More abstract versions signify Thunderbirds with X-shaped bodies, hashes for wings, and hook-like heads. And then, we're just gonna look at, this is visit CherokeeNorthCarolina.com, and this describes the Utena as basically dragon-like horned serpents. That's literally what it says verbatim, and it says the original Utena was said to have transformed from a man. And when you look at Aniyunwiyah, it calls them Thunderers, which is the same word used for the Thunderbirds known to the Algonquian and Ojibwe nations, so, yeah, pretty much dragons and bird people basically.
Aniyunwiyah versus Utena. In the Mississippian culture, you would also have the great piasso bird. The great piasso bird was, as it sounds, white bird-like with feathered wings. However, it was in fact a dragon and is often described as a dragon. It's just that the dragon had feathered wings and perhaps even a feathered body, but definitely also antlers on its head. Keep these features I'm describing in mind. Do more research than just your genealogy. It's good that you've discovered your tribe. You've discovered that you are in fact indigenous and that you didn't actually come from Africa. That's good to know. But you need to do more research than just that. You need to actually figure out what it is they believed, especially because you all have a propensity for running up against Black Hebrew Israelites and trying to argue with them about how ridiculous it is that they believe what they believe. And the reality is you both sound ridiculous because, of course, if you did your research, you would find an insurmountable preponderance of Hebrewisms in your own tribal history and tradition. And then there's, of course, the Tanakh, which speaks of Seraphim. Seraphim are only described twice, yet they're described two different ways, which means they must be able to exist in both of those ways separately. Their form is not static like ours. They can change it. So, for now, I'm going to introduce you to one of them. The book of Isaiah, chapter 6, starting from the very beginning. It reads, this is Isaiah speaking. He actually says, in the year of Uzziah the king, or in the year that Uzziah the king died. That's what he said. In the year that Uzziah the king died, I saw also Adonai sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. Seraphim, they have feet like a man. Not talons, not claws, not paws. They have feet. They're humanoid. And in fact, if you continue reading in that same passage, it describes them as having hands. Aniyunwiyah. We're going to discuss the other form in a minute.
When Asher forced a series of diasporas upon his chosen people, the Americas is where many of them wound up. He prophesied ahead of time that he would do that as punishment for their constant transgression of the Torah, his law, chiefly because they kept worshiping other gods instead of or alongside Great Spirit. Wakan Tanka would never tolerate that. He would force them to do so in exile. from the promised land. He said he'd put them in a land that neither they nor their fathers knew. Don't forget, that was part of the argument William Penn made. The founding governor of the Pennsylvania colony knew all this. That's why he was convinced that the indigents of America were the lost tribes of the Yatzaralim. Not only were they supposed to be in a land they'd never previously known, which could only be the Americas since they flexed their knowledge of Africa, Asia, and Europe throughout the scripture, but also they were prophesied to worship gods they'd not previously worshipped, gods of wood and stone. That's what they did. They carved graven images of wood and stone as idols to represent watchers.
Keep in mind also that when I use the term angel, I'm using the term angels or fallen angels, whatever the case may be, because it's the term that is most common and most understood. I want to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. But of course that word angel is a European contrivance that actually has no bearing on what we're really talking about. I prefer the term avatars. It's a better descriptor for what they actually are. What you see is just a representation. They could have represented themselves anyway. There's even cause to consider the possibility that they don't represent themselves as anything specific. It's just that we all keep seeing something specific because our unconscious minds fill in a simulated gap when we see them. I'll go over all of that in another video. Why do I think of it that way?
Watchers they'd not previously worshipped. You know these as so-called totem poles. That's what you call them, totem poles. Those tall figures that you've seen. Sometimes they seem more bird-like than others, but they were all referred to by our ancestors as Thunderbirds, right? I covered William Penn's argument on this in my previous video. I covered all that. And he was focused on how it demonstrates that the Hebrews should be here. That was all of that was part of his argument, with the exception of this totem poles part. But the totem poles, the Thunderbirds, the gods of wood and stone. If you look in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 36 and 64. Verse 36 says, Yahuwah shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there thou shalt serve other gods, wood and stone. Verse 64, and Yahuwah shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone.
Deuteronomy 28 is actually an incredibly pivotal chapter for our people, for reasons that I think are incredibly obvious to anyone who reads it, whether they want to admit it or not. The fact of the matter is, whether you believe you were brought here from Africa, or you believe that you were enslaved in your own territory right here, same difference. You were still put on a ship and sent down the Mississippi River, many of you, a great many of you. From long distances, you were brought to the Mississippi River for that purpose, to be sold in Louisiana. Many of you were taken down the Ohio River. Many of my people were taken down the Tennessee River, the Tennessee River. I bring you to Deuteronomy 28 not to focus on that, but to focus on what verses 36 and 64 say. They're saying something very similar, but they're not talking about the exact same thing. See, in verse 36 and in verse 64, we see Yahuwah saying that we will find ourselves worshiping gods of wood and stone once we've been exiled from the promised land and scattered. We're enduring our punishment in a faraway place, and in this punishment we are found worshiping gods of wood and stone. Now, in verse 36, this is introduced in conjunction with the idea of a foreign nation coming upon us, a people group, in other words, whom our forefathers have never known. And this people group, they come and oppress us. And in that oppression, they bring to us gods of wood and stone. In our oppression under that nation, we come to serve gods of wood and stone. This is separate from verse 64, telling us that we will be scattered from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. And once we reach the other end of the earth, with no mention of anyone else being around, we will simply, of our own volition, worship gods of wood and stone. You see, in that case, we're talking about, to some extent, totem poles, which were not always worshipped, but there were cases in which we can surmise that our ancestors did, in fact, actually use them for worship. And we do have an ancient history of worshiping entities that were sent by the Most High, but are not the Most High. That's what we did. Likewise, here in verse 36, we find ourselves worshiping gods of wood and stone, but these were brought to us by our oppressor. Which one is wood? Which one is stone? What are your two biggest religions here in your captivity? Islam and Christianity. The Kabbalah stone, which is located in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. And the cross, the wooden cross, which you can find in any church, almost. Those are your gods of wood and stone. I know many of you will want to disagree with me. You're going to want to push back. You would like to be able to embrace your indigenous and or Hebrew identity without having to throw away your God, but you are engaging in idolatry.
Also check Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 26 to 28, where he tells you, quote, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed. And Yahuwah shall scatter you among the nations, and you shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither Yahuwah shall lead you. And there ye shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. End quote. Look at Canada. Look at Canada. The province of Victoria has what's called Thunderbird Park. Theirs is probably the most historic example of this, but these are all over North America. Thunderbird Park is perhaps the most historic example. To this day, two such totem poles are still standing. These are watchers called Gitzan and Kwakiutl, and the phonetics of the last one, actually the phonetics of both of these should be very, very interesting to your ear, because you should notice, I'm a linguist, so maybe it's more obvious to me, but you should notice that these are actually morphemes that we see in the Uto-Aztecan language and the Mayan languages as well. But these are just examples. But totem poles are all over North America. Thunderbirds were worshipped in different ways in Central and South America too. The most popular one, you know, comes from Central America, in fact. Quetzalcoatl. You'll notice, same phonetics on that final syllable as what you saw for Kwakiutl. Kwakiutl in Canada, Quetzalcoatl down in Mexico, what is now Mexico. Quetzalcoatl was an Aztec god in the form of a serpentine bird, which is an aboriginal version of a, what? Dragon. He's a dragon, but with feathers. We don't usually see it. We don't usually depict him with feathers. That's not the European tradition. That's not the Western way. But that's all it is. It's a dragon.
And of course, you know Quetzalcoatl, the famed and most esteemed of the watchers among the Maya. Feathered serpent. Not so dissimilar from the other form that the Tanakh mentions for Seraphim. I told you earlier that Seraphim could be like Aniyunwiyah, and we saw an example of that. Now we will see them as Uktena, which is much more comparable to the much fabled Quetzalcoatl. Numbers chapter 21. We're going to look at verse 6. We're going to start with verse 6. We're going to read a little, and then we're going to come back to this passage later. Starting in verse 6. And Yahuwah sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Yatzarel died. We have the phrase Hanachashim HaSeraphim, and it can be translated any of several ways. It could be the fiery serpents, as we see here. It could be the flying serpent angels. It could be the poisonous dragons, because the same word from which we're translating the word fiery could translate to poisonous. The same word that we were translating to serpent could be dragon. Even the word that's being translated into bite or bit, they bit the people. It so happens that word also could be strike or smite. Past tense in this case would be struck or smote. The word being used for bite here is nashak. It actually transliterates to strike with a sting or to strike like a snake. So it is common to use it for the concept of a snake bite. And in fact, that is the primary usage of this word in the Tanakh. But we have an anomaly here. This verse is not like the other verses in which the word for bite is used. Or I should say this passage is not like the other passages in which this word is used, because it is preceded by the introduction of Hanachash Hatzarafim, easily talking about either just ordinary poisonous snakes or possibly fiery serpents, fiery dragons. And they are sent by Yahuwah, we're told, which means they are messengers. They are sent, and Yahuwah often sends what we now refer to as angels, what I would call avatars. They take on a form of some kind, of course. That's what an avatar is, a physical representation. So we have reason to believe that these very well could be dragons sent by the Most High. And so we now have to consider that possibility. This was an occurrence from the age of the 12 dragons. In the age of the 12 dragons, you have to also remember that many miraculous things were happening with serpents. And you have to also remember that the dragons were thinking about, or the serpents, I should say, that we're thinking about, were in fact very likely to have been dragons. In all of these cases, we've only just mentioned one. We're about to mention another.
Now, what was it that deceived Adam and Hawa in the garden, according to the Tanakh? A flying serpent, which is a dragon. This is why John the Revelator called Satan, or Satan, a dragon, in his Gnostic adaptation of prophecies from Daniel and Yechezkel. Revelation 12, verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Just to be clear, the story told in Revelation 12 doesn't come from our ancestors, and it cannot be trusted blindly. If you're Christian and you feel confident that you can trust the book of Revelation, I'm not here to shame your beliefs, although I have videos to come that will challenge you on that. Our people did not equate Satan with the great dragon, nor did they view Satan as the devil, as though it's the only demon. However, John and his fellow Roman countrymen had those misconceptions about our traditions, and he knew that what was described in Bereshit, which they call Genesis, was indeed a dragon, not in the European or Oriental tradition, but rather with feather and more bird-like features. Hence the word Quetzal in Quetzalcoatl. En español, Quetzal es más o menos sinónimo con pájaro, cual significa bird.
John the Revelator mentions the great dragon, as he calls it. He's referring to an extant scripture. Where does he get this from? It's already in the Torah. If you go to Bereshit, if you look in Genesis chapter 3, verse 14, you'll see. You're told it was a serpent in the garden, but you're actually given ample reason to suspect that it's in fact a dragon. When Hawa blames the serpent for what happened, it says, and Yahuwah said unto Hanachash, the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. What is the curse that the serpent received? This curse is that the serpent must crawl on its belly. This is a folk history of how the snake came to be a snake in the first place, and all snakes are now cursed for the actions of one. If you know anything about your indigenous traditions, you know by now, I'm sure, that there is some kind of folk history for any or all of the totem animals of your tribe. Not every animal do we have this for, but your tribe definitely has its own totem animals and probably totem trees that are significant to the nation from which you come. In the case of Aniyunwiyah, in the case of Cherokee, we, have long had traditions that were explaining how it is that, certain spiders had certain patterns on them, how owls were nocturnal, or how any animals were nocturnal. You need to learn these things about your tribe. Your people have specific animals, and totem trees, totem plants that are significant to your ancestors for a reason. And when you know these things, you begin to recognize the patterns of your own folk traditions. We were supposed to, in the age of iron teeth, come to understand each other and who we are for that very reason. And this is how we understand it now. We're now supposed to recognize ourselves. In order to recognize yourself, you need to now be able to say, okay, I can tie myself to this recent tribe. What does that tell me about my ancient heritage? We're all going to arrive at the same answer. And that's how we're going to recognize each other and recognize ourselves. But you cannot argue that we are not the Hebrews if you haven't even researched who you think we are. Research your own tribe. That's the only thing you can do. This here is a folk tradition that explains how the serpent became a serpent. It's not a curse for the serpent to crawl on the ground unless it had been previously blessed with the option to not crawl on the ground. And this curse apparently has manifested for all serpents. This is a very common pattern in the folk traditions of our people. This is an incredibly indigenous story. So even if your tribe does not have this exact story in its folklore, you should be able to recognize the pattern here. Because you should be able to say, hey, that's exactly like what happened to the water spider. Hey, that's exactly like what happened to the racer snake, or whatever animals were significant to your people. You need to recognize that. You have to be able to recognize yourself. We can't make any progress spiritually until you do that. You've discovered your tribal identity, your genealogical identity, your historical identity. You have not uncovered your spiritual identity. We have to get you there.
The Tanakh, referred to by Christians as the Old Testament, actually doesn't address the concept of angels much, but it makes two different types of references to them. This video will only deal with one of the two ways angels are described. It identifies them by their responsibility toward mankind.
Deuteronomy chapter 32. This is an incredibly important passage. I'm going to do other videos about this same passage, talking about things that are related to this. But right now I need you to look at something, okay? Because everybody who's coming out of Christianity, or maybe you're not trying to come out of Christianity right now, you still need to think about certain things having to do with what you call God or Elohim, and recognize that it's not what you think. Yahuwah is not what you think. The Great Spirit is not what you think. Everyone believes that what the Bible is trying to tell you is that there is one God, right? Monotheism is the foundational principle behind Christianity. Judaism as well, which only further demonstrates that the people who are bringing Judaism to the table are misunderstanding something very important. Right? Let us create man in our image. Who's us, right? Why is there a plurality there? Well, Christians are going to say, that's the Trinity talking. Oh, okay, so Yahuwah was talking to himself. Basically, the Father was talking amongst himself with the Son and the Holy Spirit. That's the idea. It doesn't work that way. It can't work that way. I'm going to show you. Deuteronomy 32 is an excellent place to start for us to look at this. And there's going to be something else we look at later that's going to solidify this. I'm not trying to attack Christian faith or Judaism even. I'm just trying to get you to open your mind to the possibility that the things in these scriptures are not exactly what you think. They're true, they're just not true the way you think they're true. Alright? And you don't have to even believe they're true. For many of you, they're false. I'm fine with that too. Because as I said, I'm a spirit guy. I'm a specific type of shaman. I'm not trying to control how you think. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7. We're going to start in verse 7. Moses is saying this. He says, and he's speaking to our ancestors, the Yatsarali, when he says, remember the days of old. Think about it, the people he's talking to, he himself, at this time, they are ancient to us. This is thousands of years ago. And yet, even in their time, he's saying, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee. Thy elders, and they will tell thee. He's talking about something that's already ancient history to them. Tell thee of what? When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Now, the one thing that doesn't make sense in what was just said, and if you're reading along, great. The one thing that doesn't make sense in what was just said is that the Most High separated the sons of Adam and set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So did the children of Israel already exist? Was there already an Israel at the time that the Most High divided the nations, their inheritance, separating the sons of Adam? It doesn't make sense. This passage is actually mistranslated, and we know this because in the caves of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This passage was found in a Qumranic copy of Deuteronomy. However, one word was different. It didn't say according to the number of the children of Israel, which is good because that wouldn't make sense. It actually said according to the number of the children or the sons of Elohim. What is the significance of this?
Well, this actually makes a huge difference because anyone who studies the Old Testament in depth knows that the term sons of God refers to angels. The number one passage to demonstrate this is Genesis 6, where the first few verses explain that giants existed in prehistoric days because of certain sons of Elohim procreating with human women. It didn't make sense for Yahuwah to divvy up all the early ethnic groups of mankind according to the children of Israel because Israel wouldn't have existed yet when she was dividing the tribes of the earth. The version found in the Dead Sea Scrolls actually makes sense though, because it's saying the nations were divvied up under angels. This strongly suggests certain angels were put in charge of certain ethnic groups.
Then continue with verse 9. It says, for Yahuwah's portion is his people. Yaakov is the lot of his inheritance. So Yahuwah took the people of Yatzarel as her own people, her own children, and left everyone else to be divvied up amongst these other entities.
The prophet Daniel, one of the displaced among the nation of Yahuda, appointed by Eye Asher Eye in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the prophet Daniel described in his account a moment when Nebuchadnezzar the Great sees a watcher come down from the sky in a dream to prophesy the future. This is simply to introduce you to the concept of what a watcher is. Aborigines in the Americas viewed them as spiritual beings and called them Thunderbirds, which matches the description Daniel once gave of an angel he met in a dream. If you just look at Daniel chapter 4 verses 13 to 23, I'm gonna read this real quickly. Quote, I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of the kingdom of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. See, so this is just to introduce you to the concept of what a watcher is, it being an angel, what our ancestors would call thunderbirds. I want to skip from here to a different passage to show you how Daniel describes this when he personally sees it, because he didn't personally see this. He's just interpreting a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. You can look to chapter 10 for that, verses 4 to 6. Quote, and in the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel, then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with the fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, which is a gemstone, and his face as the appearance of lightning. His face was as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. This is an angel. This is a thunderbird. It's a thunderbird. It looks like lightning. That's what it looks like. That's what the countenance of this creature is.
These are gods. They've been assigned supervisors. These are divine rulers over entire ethnic groups. The divine ruler over our ethnic group is the source of all things. Only we are blessed enough to have the divine ruler, to have our divine ruler be source. These other gods, they exist. It's not that there aren't other gods. They exist, and we're about to look at more in just a second that's going to prove it. In this same passage, I'm going to skip a few verses down. Verse 15, where Yahuwah is scolding Yatzarel for their idolatry, for our ancestors' fornication with other divine rulers, using a pet name for us that is usually only used for derision. Yahuwah calls us Yesharun. Starting with verse 15, she says, but Yesharun waxed fat and kicked. Thou art waxen fat. Thou art grown thick. Thou art covered with fatness. Then he forsook. Yesharun forsook. Yatzarel forsook. Our ancestors forsook Elohim, which made him, and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation. They provoked him to jealousy with strange Elohim, meaning foreign Elohim, strangers, gods that are strangers. They provoked it. So there are other Elohim besides Yahuwah then, and they are foreign to us. They provoked him to jealousy with foreign Elohim. With abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, it says, not to Elohim. To Elohim whom they knew not. To new Elohim that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. Of the rock that begat thee thou art unmindful, and hast forgotten Elohim that formed thee. You see this? What it demonstrates is that there are other gods. Yahuwah is not the only God, but Yahuwah is the source of all gods. That's the difference. And I'm going to explain how that's true in an upcoming video. I'm also going to explain how this is not a contradiction of other verses that repeatedly show Yahuwah saying that there is no Elohim besides Yahuwah. What I need you to get from this right now, though, is that there are other gods ruling other groups of people on the planet. There isn't just one devil. There are multiple. It says they sacrificed unto devils, plural. And it also describes these devils, plural, as gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. They sacrificed unto devils, not to Elohim, but rather to Elohim whom they knew not. So they are Elohim, but not truly Elohim, because they are not the Elohim of source. This indicates perhaps rank. in order for them to be Elohim and not be Elohim at the same time. There is a sense in which they are Elohim and another sense in which they are not. That's what devils are, and there's not just one. The spiritual entities we're dealing with here are more complex than any of the Abrahamic religions want them to be. So now we're going to go back to Numbers chapter 21. I told you we'd come back to that passage, Seraphim. When we were last in this passage, all we read was verse 6, the age of the 12 dragons. This is the beginning of the age of the 12 dragons, and we see that the Yatzaralim are being struck for something. Yahuwah sent fiery serpents, poisonous serpents, or fiery dragons, gods. And Yahuwah sent fiery dragons among the people, and they smote the people. They struck the people, and much people of Yatzarel died. Therefore, the people came to Moshe and said, "We have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahuwah and against thee. Pray unto Yahuwah that he take away the dragons from us." And Moshe prayed for the people. Moshe prayed for the people, and Yahuwah said unto Moshe, "Make thee a fiery serpent, a poisonous snake, a fiery dragon. Make thee a saraf, and set it upon a pole. Set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live." All they had to do was look at this pole, and they would live. But it's not just a pole, is it? They're fashioning a graven image. This could be a contradiction. I thought you couldn't make any graven images. Yet here Yahuwah is telling them to make one, and to make it in the likeness of the very thing that just attacked them, the very thing that Yahuwah sent to attack them. They must create a totem pole. That's what this is. This is your ancient totem pole. The concept of a totem pole is in fact Hebrew. On a pole will sit a totem of healing, and that totem of healing is a dragon.
So, I want to share this excerpt from a website called Ancient Origins, about this guy named Mark Pinkham. He's one of those fringe scholars who researches topics of very little interest or academic value, but yeah, basically he's published a ton on dragon race theory, which is this international multicultural idea that an ancient ethnic group of dragons used to have their own ancient kingdom on Earth before mysteriously disappearing. It's a wild rabbit hole, not a lot of reward at the end of that tunnel. But it's important to know that this idea exists so we can explore why anyone would even bother to investigate it. This site introduces him like this. Quote, Markamaru Pinkham is an author and researcher who has published 6 books on the ancient mysteries of Earth and the evolution of humanity. His books include The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom, Guardians of the Holy Grail, World Gnosis, The Coming Gnostic Civilization, The Truth Behind the Christ Myth, and his most recent book, Sedona, City of the Star People, within which he reveals that the Hopi legend of Palikwapi, an ancient temple city built by the Star People, or Kachinas, is a reference to the city of ruined red rock temples that Sedona, Arizona was built upon. Mark is also the Grand Prior of the International Order of Gnostic Templars, which is a revival of the Gnostic and alchemical rites and beliefs of the original Knights Templar. Mark is also director of the Jeti School of Ancient Wisdom, and through sacred sites journeys he leads tours in Sedona, Peru, Egypt, and to many other sacred sites around the globe. End quote. Okay, so remember that first book they mentioned was called The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom, right? So let me read the back of the book. Here goes. Ready? Quote, according to ancient records, the patriarchs and founders of the early civilizations in Egypt, India, China, Peru, Mesopotamia, Britain, and the Americas were colonized by the serpents of wisdom, spiritual masters associated with the serpent who arrived in these lands after abandoning their beloved homelands and crossing great seas, while bearing names denoting snake or dragon, such as Naga, Lung, Jeti, Amaru, Quetzalcoatl, Adder, etc. These serpents of wisdom oversaw the construction of magnificent civilizations within which they and their descendants served as the priest kings and as the enlightened heads of mystery school traditions. The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom recounts the history of these serpents, where they came from, why they came, the secret wisdom they disseminated, and why they are returning now. End quote. Yeah, so obviously we're taking this guy with a grain of salt. But basically this book is about the idea that lots of ancient civilizations originally being founded by so-called serpents of wisdom who abandoned their homelands to go build up many of the greatest civilizations of world history in a super influential diaspora of some kind. Their own descendants were apparently the priest kings of these civilizations, maybe the priest kings of all mankind. Keep in mind that this term, priest king, is unique. It's the literal meaning of the word Powhatan, which is the name of the empire Pocahontas came from. It's also the role that the ancient Israelites were supposed to play, which is why you hear Christians call themselves a royal priesthood, citing 1 Peter 2 verse 9, which is where the Apostle Peter uses this term in reference to believers who have joined their group, the beginning of the Christian church. Quote, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." End quote. Notice he uses the terms royal priesthood and holy nation interchangeably. That's because Christianity teaches that those who believe in Jesus replace the Israelites as the chosen people of the Great Spirit. In the Old Testament, the Israelites were the chosen nation, and the Great Spirit actually said that would never change according to the ancient prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah 31 verses 35 and 36 says, quote, "Thus saith Yahuwah, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, which divides the sea when the waves thereof roar, Yahuwah Shabbaoth is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, saith Yahuwah, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever." End quote. In other words, the sun would stop lighting the day and the moon would stop dividing the oceans before Israel would stop being the chosen nation. They are the original priest kings. They were supposed to literally rule the world and enforce the law of nature, which is the Torah. That's also why Psalm 8:2 verse 6 tells the Israelites, "I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High." So the question is whether or not Pinkham's book is unwittingly referring to these children of the Most High when it talks about the descendants of the serpents of wisdom, which again were the likes of Quetzalcoatl and the Nagas from the Hindu pantheon.
This thing, it takes the form of a man, yet appears to him only in this vision, which none of the other people with Daniel could see. This angel's face was like lightning, according to Daniel. Thunderbird.
Daniel met one of the Aniyunwiyah. That is the type of Thunderbird he met. We've seen this model that he's describing in the Salagi tradition, right? And so we know what it is. Aniyunwiyah.
Thunderbird.
Why brass? Why copper? The Most High commissioned our ancestors to engage in many holy, sacred rituals. These were shamanistic practices. In the Bible, they want to show you the word priest because they're trying to put a specific look on what's happening here. They don't want you to see the things that they would refer to as savage because they've already taught you that those things are savage. But in reality, everything that those priests were doing was savage. Why? Because this was shamanism. These practices involved precious metals, gold and silver, and brass, and iron and others, but each of them had their own spiritual significance. What's the spiritual significance of brass? Color has a lot to do with this. This is the color of the earth, the color of soil. And you'll notice it was actually quite important. Most High actually had us build an altar out of brass. Not just an altar, the altar. We usually made altars out of stone, but the altar of the tabernacle, which was our temple before the temple. Before we could build an ornate temple, we had a tabernacle. I'm going to do a whole video about what the tabernacle was. It was actually a very obviously indigenous structure, and we replicated the tabernacle many times here in the Americas. But the point is that the tabernacle had an altar that was special, set apart from all other altars that we made. And this altar was to be made of a specific type of wood, but then all of that wood on the horns of the altar and on the staves of the altar were to be overlain with brass. The horns of the altar and the staves of the altar. These are the most human parts of the altar. The legs and the arms of the altar. The parts that stand and the parts that hold things. The body needed to be like a human body, crafted of brass. So you see, this is also important because the altar was for what? Sacrifices. Sacrifices. Yes. The altar is a non-living servant of the Most High. And we were the living servants. We dressed our altar as a servant, like unto ourselves. So it's no wonder here that we see that the serpent must be also made of brass. It had to be made of brass because brass is the metal used for atonement. And it is the metal that is used to symbolize connection with the earth. Not just any connection with the earth, the human connection with the earth. That is the purpose of brass. There is a human connection being superimposed onto this dragon. What is the human connection to the earth that a dragon would have?
Census.gov, enumeration of Pueblo Indians, 1790 to 1939, arranged by county, then village or pueblo. The Spanish and Mexican governments conducted censuses in 1790, 1823, and 1845. The United States began conducting territorial censuses in 1850. The schedules provide name, relation to head of household, and often age. Although the indication of race is often unreliable, many pueblos are listed as non-white. The racial designation of inhabitants of Taos Pueblo, for example, is copper in the 1850 census and Indian in the 1860 and 1870 censuses. Not all pueblos are included in the book indexes. Why on any census would any indigenous group have been officially classified as copper as if it's the legitimate name of a race of people? Here it is again in Harriet Beecher Stowe's now infamous book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Quote, before the white people came over to America, it had many tribes of people in it. Some of these tribes still remain in the United States and in the countries north of it and in South America. These form what are called the American race. They have a copper-colored skin, long black hair, small dark eyes, and very thick lips and broad noses. End quote. Copper or brass was the most common comparison for the skin tone of the swarthy aborigines of the Americas. This brassy complexion was also given to the dragon totem built by Moses in Numbers chapter 21. It's as if the Israelites were depicting dragons as bearing their own skin tone, the complexion of the soil from which man was made.
What is the human connection if it's a dragon and not a human? We're about to find out later. This graven image was commissioned by the Most High, and it was a totem pole, and it was not worshipped, and it served its purpose. And it was legendary enough that it was recorded by Moshe in this book, Sefer Bamidbar. So it is something that the Yatzaralim came to know well. They remembered this story for some time, it would appear. This totem pole was not coming out of nowhere to them. Here they are doing this, crafting this, making this in order to save the lives of many Yatzaralim in the age of the 12 dragons. And soon you're going to see why it is I say that the day of Moshe was the beginning of the age of the 12 dragons. But before the age of the 12 dragons, what did you have? You had this same symbol appear in Sumer long beforehand, in the age of rebellion, also called the age of Nimrod, Ningish Sida. Who is Ningish Sida? That's who you're looking at in this passage of scripture. Ningish Zida can be found on the libation vase of Gudea, one of the rulers of Sumer. And when you see him there, he is in fact manifesting in one of his known forms, but he had more than one known form. He had a humanoid form, but when you see him on this vase, instead of his humanoid form, what you see is two snakes, two serpents intertwined around a pole. There's a connection here, the serpent and the pole, and it is of Sumerian origin. The Hebrews were Sumerians. The Hebrews as a people can't be traced back any further than Sumer, but I'll do a video about that separately. And Ningish Zida's name means Lord of the Good Tree. Lord of the Good Tree, which may have loosely alluded to the tree of knowledge of good and of evil. We've come full circle. We're finding ourselves back in the forest of Eden with the subtle serpent or wise dragon that deceived the first people. We see Ningish Zida on the libation vase of Sumerian ruler Gudea. It's important to note, Ningish Zida manifests not as one serpent on a pole, but two. And the creature on either side of the twin serpents that Ningish Zida manifests as, two identical creatures on either side of the twin serpents. They are important also. They are just two depictions of Mushushu. Mushushu is actually a short serpent with eagle feet and lion's forelegs as its arms, and a serpent head and a serpent mouth with horns on its head.
In the ancient Sumerian language, mush-hush meant reddish snake or ruddy snake.
And as a matter of fact, Mushushu is, despite being Sumerian, the origin of the Taoist dragon, Mushu.
Did I hear someone ask for America? The indestructible Mushu.
Mushu is very important in Chinese history. While Mushushu was initially a chimeric creature, Mushu in the Taoist tradition loses just a little bit of that of those chimeric features and becomes more uniformly reptilian, which you can see in the black copper statue, brass statue of Mushu that has become so famous.
Here's a bronze effigy of Mushu. He's dark brown yet easily described as having a reddish hue. In other words, he's a copper-colored dragon. You'll notice he's also given the surname Yulong. Surnames come first in Sino-Asiatic cultures. This is actually a title though, meaning jade dragon. Obviously, jade usually means green, not red, so one might wonder why the ruddy dragon would also be associated with the color green.
Mushu is an exilic descendant of the dragon race. Yes, there's a dragon race. This is the real story of Mushu. A direct son of the dragon king, yet expelled from their land. Mushu was cast out. This should all sound familiar to you. If it doesn't, don't worry, I'm going to explain it in a minute. But Mushu was the descendant of the dragon king. He is of the dragon race, and not just of the dragon race, but a descendant of the dragon king, which means Mushu is royalty, yet he is banished from his royal land, and he goes into exile. During his exile, he ends up wandering into a situation that forces him onto a journey to the west. To the west. This should be sounding familiar. Who else does this sound like to you? A journey to the west. Remember, his effigy, his statue, the statue of Mushu is made of what? Copper, brass. Remember the connection. So he ends up on a journey to the west. And on this journey to the west, this much fabled, very legendary journey to the west, he ends up aiding Sun Wukong. For those of you who don't know who that is, I'm gonna explain it in just a second, but let me put it this way. Sun Wukong is the Chinese name. In Japanese, the name is Son Goku. Journey to the West is by far the most classic Chinese novel in the history of Chinese literature. It is an epic, it is a tome, meaning it is extremely long, but it is, in fact, the primary foundational inspiration for the mega manga and anime franchise Dragon Ball Z. It is actually an inspiration to several other manga and anime franchises as well, including Inuyasha, but especially, most pointedly and most obviously, Dragon Ball Z. Mushu accompanies Sun Wukong on his journey to the west. Mushu is in exile from his land of rulership, his promised land. It was promised to him because he was royalty. He was to inherit it and become ruler, but now he's been exiled. And so he is now being pushed to the ends of the earth with a journey to the west, and he is now to become a mere sidekick to Sun Wukong. And as he does this, please understand this journey in the actual story of this, the narrative of this is set. It is in the 7th century CE with the Tang dynasty usurping power from everyone that it can. There is a massive Turco-Mongolic power struggle going on at that time, and it is at this time that the narrative takes place. And at the end of the journey, Mushu is entrusted with what is called the Jade Stone, and he must protect it. Later, it is stolen. He's been protecting it for many years until finally one day it gets stolen during the onset of war with the Huns. And so, in order to get it back from the Huns, Mushu aids Mulan in yet another popular story that you probably know. You've probably heard of Mulan. For the few of you who have not seen Dragon Ball Z, you probably have seen Disney's Mulan. And in Mulan, you know that she's running around with a small red dragon companion named Mushu. Yes, that is coming straight from yet another classic Chinese story involving this same deific spiritual entity, a dragon who has been banished from his royal spiritual priesthood, or rulership, I should say, by guarding and protecting and then having to retrieve the Jade Stone. Mushu becomes known as the Jade Dragon. And so over time, because he becomes known as the Jade Dragon, Jade is typically a gemstone that is green. He becomes most affiliated with the color green, even though he was not originally depicted as such. And so in more recent and modern and contemporary Chinese and Japanese cultures, you see a lot of depictions of the Jade Dragon as being a dragon who is jade, almost as if perhaps the original meaning for why he was called the Jade Dragon is being lost, and we're now just playing with the character type, the mold of this Jade Dragon. And so now we have a green dragon. You see it in Dragon Ball Z, the eternal dragon who grants the wishes of those who gather all 7 Dragon Balls. That eternal dragon is always what color? Green. Whether it's Shinran or Purunga, no matter what planet you're on, the eternal dragon is always green because it's a Jade Dragon, and it always has the same 2 antlers on its head that Mushu has. You see that? Mushu had those same antlers. And the eternal dragon on Dragon Ball Z has it, and so does Uktena of the Cherokee of the Cherokee tradition. Although sometimes it may just be one horn. But then also the great Piasso bird of the Mississippian culture, antlers. So you see, there is actually a consistency here, and we're just getting started. In fact, now why does all of this matter? The reason it matters is because they're talking about you, Yatsa. I know that may be hard to believe, but you are the legend that everyone's always talking about. You've left your mark everywhere you've been. In East Asia, you left behind your reputation as a confederacy of nations, of people who dwelt among these dragons. That is the legend of who you are, a dragon race. The legend would be so profound that some would think that you were dragons. Depending on what form you find your story in, It could be that you lived among dragons or that you were dragons yourselves. But one way or another, it had to do with you and dragons. You were a mystical people about whom all kinds of stories have been told. The legend really begins with you coming as mercenaries, as slaves who freed themselves through mysterious means out of the bondage of Kemet, an ancient kingdom whose imperial power was known far and wide. You emerged as this unstoppable nation despite being a fledgling, young, and very small number of people at first. You uprooted the Canaanites and took root in the land they had been dwelling in and built a magnificent kingdom that for a time was unstoppable. Unstoppable. When you came out of Egypt, you were led, legend has it, by 2 dragons, 2 serpents. Moshe and his brother Aharon both carried staves or walking sticks or poles. These poles were serpents. They didn't just by some miracle turn into snakes at one moment and then turn back into sticks. No, these poles were inhabited by seraphim. That's what they are. They were inhabited by dragons. Dragons sent by the Most High, deployed by the Great Spirit. Our ancestors were led out of slavery by twin snakes, twin dragons. This legend reaches far and wide. One of the most important symbols in ancient Kemet was the jade pillar. Jade pillar. You see how everything comes full circle over and over? The jade pillar was not actually called jade because it was in reference to a specific color of the specific gemstone that was called a jade. This is D-J-E-D, jade. The jade pillar included 3 green layers, though. What was the jade pillar? The jade pillar was actually a symbol that you saw the ancient Kemetic people depict on the walls all the time, and typically in connection with Osiris and later Ptah. It was believed to be the spinal cord of Osiris, as a matter of fact. Osiris, of course, was a Kemetic god. His spine was a serpent that was apotheosized as the jade pillar, the ancient Kemetic equivalent to a totem pole. Not exactly a totem pole, but their analog to what a totem pole is. Now, you have to understand how important the symbol of Ningish Zida actually is, because it became associated with you specifically, because of what Elohim did through Moshe and Aharon, between Moses and Aaron. The twin dragons were the staves, the poles, the sticks that they carried. And upon a pole, they created a totem pole atop which was a dragon. Anyone who looked at it would be healed from the wounds that were inflicted upon them by the dragons that were deployed by the Great Spirit, right? Well, that caused this idea of a serpent on a pole to suddenly become associated with healing. The symbol existed before you. This symbol of twin dragons or twin snakes inscribing a pole or intertwining around a pole. It didn't symbolize health. Not when it was Ningish Zida we were talking about. The Sumerian tradition did not view him as such, as a god of healing or anything. However, we see Moshe's staff reveal its form when the Great Spirit first demonstrates this power to Moshe and first gives Moshe all his instructions. Then we see the staff of Aharon do the same at the palace of Pharaoh. Many of the miracles that Moshe went on to perform thereafter were all done with this same staff. It's no coincidence that this dragon that this staff that transforms into a dragon or reveals the form of a dragon at various times is also the staff that is doing all of these other things. It's not Moshe who's doing anything. The Great Spirit is working through Moshe by deploying its agents. She deploys her servants, and so parts of her are in fact these dragons that are dispensed to accomplish things, to turn the rivers into blood, to strike a water and manifest, to strike a rock and manifest water from it, to give victory to the Yatzaralim in battle against the Amalekites, the Amalekim. He would hold up his staff, and as long as he kept it held up, they would be victorious. When he would let his arms lower from fatigue, their troops would begin to start. They would start losing. Right? All of these things were being done with the staff. That pole is clearly imbued with something. That's why Yahuwah kept telling Moshe to use the pole to do things. Now she commands them to build this pole of brass and set upon it a dragon, also of brass. You fast forward, and suddenly this becomes a symbol of health. You fast forward, all of this was happening at the start of the age of the 12 dragons. Fast forward the age of the devouring bear. In the age of the devouring bear, we see that the New Testament depicts Yeshua, and Yeshua is having, to advise his disciples. And in advising his disciples, he tells them to be both as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. An interesting piece of advice. Many of you worship Yeshua. I apologize if I'm not calling him by the name you prefer that he be called. Anywho, Yeshua advises his disciples to be A, as wise as serpents, but also B, as harmless as doves. Because this dyadic pair of the serpent and the dove actually comes together to form the caduceus, or caduceus. Caduceus symbol is a brass pole coiled by a serpent with the wings of a dove. The caduceus is the hermetic symbol of medicine. This is and it's only one serpent this time, not two. It's only one serpent this time, not two. Why? Because it's meant to be exactly what they were taking from your ancestors, what they had witnessed from your ancestors, or at least read about regarding your ancestors. So they're trying to recreate that. The hermetic symbol of medicine is this exact thing, that the brass pole with the serpent on it, but they've added dove wings. And this symbol is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. This is, of course, the Greco-Egyptian amalgam of the Greek god Hermes and the late Kemetic god Thoth.
I feel like it's worth pointing out too that Hermes was the messenger god in Greek mythology, and the Hebrew word for angel actually transliterates more accurately to messenger. These seraphim that the Israelites made that totem pole for were also angels, or you might say draconic messengers. Hermes' staff pretty much assembles the elements of a dragon, so we're seeing yet another connection between dragons and messengers, suggesting dragons might fundamentally be divine messengers of the Great Spirit. Theoretically, they're just forms that represent the divine on the material plane.
Yeah, I would also add that Yeshua was deploying his disciples to evangelize the world, so they were actually being sent as messengers in a very literal sense. In fact, this makes them messengers of God in the Christian religion, which further explains why Christ would speak the attributes of essentially dragons on them. Plus, we've seen the U.S. Army Medical Corps adopt this caduceus symbol for the last 120 years, and I think that's because messengers aren't just people who bring a verbal message. Like, philosophically speaking, soldiers are messengers too, which is why we see angels slaughtering people in the Bible, often in the wars of the Israelites specifically. Sometimes the message is action.
So we mentioned how this influence has spread to so many different ethnic groups over time, different nations over time. They remember you, but now even they have forgotten who the people are. They have no way of tracing that these legends actually connect to you. They don't even fully recall the origins of these legends. Even with the ancient Kemetic people, there are no people on earth today with any connection to the ancient Kemetic people. The Egyptians today are completely irrelevant to that history. They're not related to that history at all, which is unfortunate because, of course, we would have further insight on Thoth, whose name is being butchered whenever we say Thoth. If you look at how his name is actually supposed to be spelled, it's DHWTY or something like that. This is more closely to being pronounced Jehuti, which would be the adjectival form of the proper noun Judah. If said properly in Hebrew, it would be Yahudi. Thoth is actually the moon god of wisdom and sciences. The moon itself was referred to by the ancient Kemetic peoples as Yah, I-A-H. And of course, we are a lunar people, which is why this channel is what it is. We have a lunar posting schedule, and it is sacred in honor of the sign we were given with our covenant with the Most High Yahuwah. Yah gave us that sign, and so we order our steps by the moon. The Sabbaths are actually meant to be lunar. I know many of you disagree. I know the majority of you disagree with that. Even those of you who are keeping the Sabbath, you're not keeping a lunar Sabbath, and you disagree with what I'm saying. I understand. That's fine. We'll talk about it in a different video. Yes, Thoth was in fact merged with Hermes, and many of you want to cling to Thoth and Ta and all of these late Kemetic divinities and concepts that you only know about because they were popularized by your oppressor, Greeks. What your connection to Kemet is, I have no idea. If you genuinely were brought to the Americas from Africa as slaves, you would not have been, none of the ethnic groups you would have been taken from in West Africa had anything to do with the indigenous people of Kemet, who are, by the way, long gone. Even in the time of Christ, even in the age of the devouring bear, this Kemet that you love was already a heavily mixed nation, equally Greek, equally Egyptian. The indigenous people were being lost and to Greek consumption ever since being conquered by Alexander the Great, which is why the capital at the time was Alexandria, as opposed to Thebes or Memphis. So this is also the beginning of the European version of the dragon concept, merging snakes with wings. And it closely resembles the double helix model for DNA, hence the association with medicine, because the twin serpents that we've already seen intertwining one another make a double helix in shape. And so the World Health Organization's logo is also a snake-only variant of this same symbol, meaning that it gets rid of the wings. World Health Organization, health, medicine, right? All these things trace back to the Hebrew tradition, and the WHO logo is no different. The WHO logo, the Caduceus symbol, they both trace back to specifically the healing effects of the brass serpent Moshe commanded the people to make in order to heal those who had been harmed by the dragons. And all of these people in the age of the devouring bear had already had a chance to read about this, for that event, for centuries, because the Septuagint had been available for a couple of centuries already. They'd been reading the Septuagint already. The Septuagint already existed. For those who don't know, the Septuagint is just the Greek translation of of the Tanakh at that time, and then later it also would include the New Testament. It didn't need to translate because the New Testament was written in Greek to begin with, because it was never a Hebrew. None of those books were ever Hebrew. The point I'm trying to make is that the Hebrews were legendary. In particular, the Yatzaralim, our ancestors, were legendary. Legendary. You can see that they would not have adopted this symbol in so many places, if they had not heard about it from us. They had to have known about us. The Septuagint is probably one of the first literary works to go viral. That's what happened. The legend of who we were went viral, and so everybody was talking about the Yatzaralim, even once we had already been busted down to size. We began to become looked at as this once great empire that was now in shambles, and it was also fabled that we had been scattered. The Yahudim were still there, having to deal with the Greeks and having to deal with the Romans, but the rest were scattered across the earth, right? From one end of the earth to the other. And that scattering is equally legendary. This is why it had to be depicted in Dragon Ball Z by way of the scattering of the Dragon Balls. After every time the wishes are made, the Dragon Balls must scatter to the ends of the earth, and you have to go find them again, right? Because the whole point is the gathering. That's what everything's about. We want to continually relive, we want to continually model the gathering of the Yatzaralim. When you gather all 7 Dragon Balls together, the dragon reappears. That's what happens. You've only got the dragon when they're all together. We are the great story of the indomitable empire that was divided against itself and could not stand. The legend is that you were an unstoppable people, and we became so legendary that the folklore has swelled over time to suggest that perhaps there were dragons living in your kingdom among you. Maybe even you were dragons. This is why it's not just the eternal dragon on Dragon Ball Z that is depicted as green, but also the creators of the dragon are actually Namekians, an alien race of people who are also green, with antennas coming off of their heads. So of course they're derogatorily referred to sometimes by their enemies as lizard men. They're reptilian. And all of this fear going on around people about a conspiracy, of reptilian people running the show in some kind of shadowy cabal behind the scenes in real life today. No. Their fear stems from their fear of you. You're the new world order that's coming, and it's actually the old world order. You will restore order, the order of old, and that's what they fear. Reptilians, dragons, coming to do this again. And so, of course, everyone's been talking about you for a long time now. You just perhaps didn't realize it because you never recognize yourself in these legends, because you are a destroyed people. Yahuwah said you would be. One of the ways a people is destroyed is that they lose their identity. It's the same thing that happens as a result of miscegenation, right? When one people consumes another people and they mix together, the people that was consumed, they are destroyed. The colonizer then takes over. They're not destroyed by virtue of the fact that they were doing the consuming. So they live on through their traditions, they live on through their decisions about what would be done with this land and this kingdom. Like I said, these Dragon Balls, when a wish is made with the eternal dragon, they scatter. The model that is repeatedly being shown here is that the Dragon Balls must be gathered again. That's That's what the focus is. That's why it's called Dragon Ball Z. We don't call it Goku because it's not actually about Goku. The show's not called Goku, it's not called Vegeta, it's not called Gohan. It's called Dragon Ball Z because the focus is on regathering these Dragon Balls and summoning the Eternal Dragon, because the Eternal Dragon has the power to restore order to whatever chaos has ensued upon the planet. That's what this is all about. And this is also why there are 7 balls. There were always 7 Dragon Balls required for this, even though 8 is a far more meaningful number in Chinese and Japanese cultures. Akira Toriyama chose 7 anyway. He has said that he chose 7 to avoid blatantly copying a 19th century Japanese novel, Hakenden, in which 8 warriors are scattered, right? And gradually find each other and discover that they're all spiritual descendants of the same spiritual ancestor. This too was actually inspired by you. Even that from which Akira Toriyama borrowed within his own culture was yet more lore about you. And this is the global scattering of the dragon people. And this global diaspora is something East Asians once knew. They used to know who it was that was dispersed through their lands to reach Australia, and to reach New Zealand, and to reach Fiji, and to reach Hawaii, and to reach, of course, eventually the Americas. That's what we did. We traversed their land, so they remember us. That's why they have so many stories about us. And so it's a legendary diaspora, and in fact, those East Asian groups, those East Asian peoples, they are the keepers of all that history through their folklore. And so this, like I said, this legendary diaspora or scattering is the reason why after the Eternal Dragon uses its power, it always disappears and scatters the Dragon Balls. It's a cycle of it's a cycle that repeatedly models the scattering of the Atzaralim. And this anime, this show, remodels the same concept with the Namekians themselves, the actual race of people who created the Dragon Balls. They lose their home, right? Their home planet gets destroyed, and they are forced to relocate to another homeland. They have their own kind of diaspora. But it's also remodeled in the form of the Saiyans. Every model of anything, Akira Toriyama usually will do more than once within this story. So he actually models this in the Saiyans as well, who are a mighty race of limitless potential, but whose planet is also destroyed by a pink-white emperor of distant worlds. Pretty on the nose, white man. And they experience a scattering. This scatters a tiny remnant of Saiyans throughout the universe, and every so often we encounter a new one. It's just the recycling of the same model of the legendary diaspora for the alien race, more palatable to Western viewers because they're white instead of green, or much worse, brown, aligning with European Jews without infringing upon the identity of the colored originals. So that's why Saiyans and Namekians are two separate identities. You have the original identity and this new reclamation of that identity by a people who don't really resemble the people we're talking about. And so the original color is of course jade green because of Mushu being the jade dragon. Even though the jade dragon wasn't originally green, That's the evolution of the mythology over time. This is why Jake Long, the American Dragon, many of you may remember that cartoon. Jake Long, the American Dragon, is a cartoon depicting a kid who has dark green hair, and he can transform into a dragon that looks exactly like Mushu based on the design of Mushu from Mulan. And the significance of jade is that many ancient Asian cultures considered it to be sacred or indicative of royalty, and the Atzaralim used it on the 4th row of the breastplate of judgment worn by the chief shaman, which they call in the Tanakh, in your translation, the high priest. In there, it is not called jade in your translation. It's, if you have the King James Version or any of those early versions, it's called jasper. Exodus 28 verse 20, as well as Exodus 39 verse 30. The 2nd row contained an emerald also, which is yet another green gemstone. So green appeared twice in the breastplate. These brilliant stones were used as a way to consult the Great Spirit about very important matters. We see evidence of that in Numbers chapter 27 verse 21. This is why the eternal dragon in Dragon Ball Z is consulted by gathering 7 precious marbles or crystal balls to summon him. 2 of the stones are supposed to be green. Now remember, the only reason we're even talking about Dragon Ball Z in the first place is because of this epic work, this classic Chinese work, Journey to the West, on which that anime and many other anime are based. Journey to the West. This is where we get Sun Wukong, the monkey of limitless potential, and who is also in Japanese Shinto called Son Goku. Now he journeys to the West specifically in search of 81 Buddhist Noble Sutras. Remember, this is nearing the end of the age of the devouring bear. And of course, Mushu is at his side, but he reappears for yet another famous adventure with Mulan in the early part of the age of the winged leopard. In this journey to the West, the point is to obtain these 81 Buddhist Noble Sutras. Mind you, Buddhist Noble Sutras, we're talking about Buddha now, and we're trying to get to Siddhartha Gautama, who is now known by this title, Buddha, and is believed to have been protected by the Nagaraja, or king of the Nagas. I'll say that again, Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha, who is believed to have been protected, living in this time period we're talking about, is believed to have been protected by the king of the Nagas. Buddhists refer to Nagaraja as Mukalinda. The term Nagaraja comes from Hindu. Once reaching enlightenment and becoming the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama was viewed as earning the respect and guardianship of the Nagas. You gotta be wondering, what are or who are the Nagas? Nagas were a race of serpentine demigods of the Hindu underworld. They could take human form at will, and they were often said to rise to the surface world from bodies of water, like the Hebrew Leviathan. There's a legend of an Indian Iron Age kingdom called Kuru, sacrificing snakes by fire in reaction to a previous king having died by poisonous snake bite. And in this event is called Sarpa Satra, meaning snake sacrifice. A Hindu sage named Astika went to this kingdom and got them to stop by invoking the authority of his parents, a human father and Naga goddess mother. The latter was, in fact, a sister of one of the kings of the Nagas, Vasuki, and her name was Manasa. Her name was Manasa, one of the tribes of Yatzarel, the half-tribe Manasa, the half-tribe of Yosef. and a key tribe at that. For her to be Manasseh is to also, and this is not her only name, but it's important to note that in this context, and that is because she, Manasseh, is one of these Nagas, and the Nagas are meant to be Yatzarel. That's what they are. These stories are inspired by real things, but the real things in question have to do with a real people who everyone in Asia views as just gone now. And so in the age of the devouring bear, and subsequently in the age of the winged leopard, we see that these people groups throughout Asia were actually dealing with their own experiences, the experiences they had with Yatzarel, this kingdom that they mention is real. Now you find this story in Hindu mythology, but this kingdom is real. They are hearkening backward in time to a real kingdom that they remember in the Indian subcontinent, but they're writing about it in a time that comes long after the fall of Yatzarel, the fall of Judea, the fall of, all of that. This lore may have very well been inspired by specifically the fall of the Israelites, of the northern Israelites, to the Assyrians, because Manasseh was one of the Israelite tribes first taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and because Sarpasatra is believed to have occurred in the same period of history as that event, in fact. That's the time period they were hearkening back to. And so, albeit a few centuries prior, actually, but again, their historians would have had a difficult time tracking the exact time period, the exact century in which the event in question would have occurred. Anyway, that would have been difficult for them to pin down, especially considering their own removal from the situation when it actually happened. The story was recorded retrospectively, maybe 1,300 to 2,000 years after the fact, which means the writers may have been targeting the centuries of the fall of Yatzarel and simply overshot. Manasseh, being the sister of the king of the Nagas, may also signify an understanding that the Yatzarelim were led by twin powers, which could refer to Manasseh and Ephraim, or Joseph and Judah. But these are either way twin powers, with the former, Ephraim and Manasseh, consisting of being actual siblings.
So yeah, this is why I brought up Mark Pinkham earlier, including his book Serpents of Wisdom. In case you forgot, the publisher's own description of the book listed the Nagas among the examples of this dragon race he was talking about. The fact is, though, Manasseh was a royal Naga with a brother who was king of Nagas. Ephraim, brother of Manasseh, was the seat of power in northern Israel when the empire split into two separate confederacies, north and south. The Nagas were dragons who, despite being indomitable demigods, found themselves suddenly being conquered and slaughtered by another kingdom. We read this in Astakaparva section 38.
Yeah, I'm gonna read a piece of that section where Brahman talks. In Hindu, the great spirit's called Brahman, and in this passage, he explains why he let the curse of Kadru cause the snakes to be slaughtered by another kingdom. Quote, "The gods said, O grandsire, thou god of gods, who else than the cruel Kadru could thus, after getting such dear children, curse them so, even in thy presence? And, O grandsire, by thee also have been spoken, with reference to those words of hers, be it so. We wish to know the reason why thou didst not prevent her." Brahman replied, "The snakes have multiplied. They are cruel, terrible in form, and highly poisonous. From desire of the good of my creatures, I did not prevent Kadru then. Those poisonous serpents and others who are sinful, biting others for no faults, shall, indeed, be destroyed, but not they who are harmless and virtuous. And hear also, how, when the hour comes, the snakes may escape this dreadful calamity. There shall be born in the race of the Yayavaras a great rishi known by the name of Jarakuru, intelligent, with passions under complete control. That Jarakuru shall have a son of the name of Astika. He shall put a stop to that sacrifice. And those snakes who shall be virtuous shall escape therefrom. End quote. So, the reason all this happened to the Nagas was because they were sinful, but those who were virtuous at that time were saved from the massacre because a sage named Astika was prophesied to be born to restore peace to the virtuous remnant. That virtuous remnant would be the kingdom of Judah, who wasn't sinless, but confessed its sin and repented. Astika's name may even relate to the name of the very king who did this for Judah, which was Hezekiah. It's supposed to be pronounced Heetsikya, which might parallel Astika in Sanskrit. Heetsikya is a name that means existence is my power, and Astika is a name that means one who trusts existence.
Fulfillment of a curse from the mother of Nagas, Kadru, which Brahman allowed. So by the time Astika actually enters the scene and makes a difference, a lot of Nagas have already been sacrificed. And this was a fulfillment of a curse from the mother of Nagas, Kadru, which Brahman allowed to happen because, as he put it, these poisonous serpents, quote unquote, were sinful. That's how it's written. The birth of Astika was prophesied ahead of time, and Astika was then anointed by the gods to end the suffering of the Nagas and save a remnant who were still alive. His name is an important Hindu term, literally meaning one who believes in existence. When I do my video coming very soon on returning to the Great Spirit, you will come to know even more how significant it is that Astika's name should mean that. But it means, but Asti means there is or there exists, and possibly implies there exists another world, Astika, opposite of Nastika, which is the other half of this duality. This etymology is further supported by Encyclopedia Britannica. All of this is actually very mainstream information for anyone who is already knowledgeable about Hindu. This information, especially if you were raised with it, might sound very familiar, but what's new to you probably is how I'm characterizing it in the context of the ancient Yatsaralim as ancestors of the indigenous people of the Americas who are swarthy. All of that is probably the twist you weren't ready for. But this name Astika is also the word from which we get swastika. The word swastika is derived from the name Astika, meaning su, good, astika, existence, good state of being, which was co-opted by the German Nazi Party, which is either their insignia is either two overlapping serpents, or you could see it as four serpents surrounding an object, all of which is well demonstrated. Certainly the latter is well demonstrated by the horned serpent of the Mississippian culture. Once again, we're back to the indigenous American people, and this in particular, the one I'm talking about now, can be seen on what's referred to as engraved shell cup number 229 in the Spiro Mounds, S-P-I-R-O, Spiro Mounds. And you might find it interesting that, of course, this word Spiro was used as used for a pun to create the name of the video game and its main character, Spyro, right? It's a pun because it's a play on the word pyro, which is just usually a prefix intended to reflect something being done with fire. But the dragon, Spyro, is the main character of that game, and of course it would be a dragon, and this dragon also has, what, 2 horns. on his head. He's a horned serpent, and the Spiro mounds are a fixture in what remains of the Mississippian culture, which was arguably the greatest empire North America has ever seen. Challenged only by perhaps the West, though, is correlated actually with other nations whose cultures can corroborate the existence of this tradition of seeing or depicting the horned serpent. We see that from the Hopi Navajo Tlingit. Anyway, the swastika also appears as the carved windows of the ancient stone-cut Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, and as well as the Asante Empire, or Ashanti. They used to use weights engraved with this same symbol, followed by two vertical lines as featured at the Brooklyn Museum. The Asante, of course, sold quote-unquote Jews of Sudan al-Bilad in the transatlantic slave trade. Those Yahudim were previously rulers over the Ashanti in the Songhai and Mali empires. But the Arab slave trade came and messed up all of that. The Songhai and Mali empires dissolved. Eventually, these tribes became weaker, splintered, and ended up warring with individual tribes they used to rule within West Africa. This is how the slave trade ended up happening. There will be much more information on all of that. All of that will go into detail in other videos. But anyway, yes, those are our people. Even though we are indigenous to this land, many of those people came over to the Americas, and we share the Hebrew ancestry with them. We are now being reunited in the Americas. Very few of them actually came to North America, but in any case, the point is we're seeing this dragon connection, and we're seeing the influence that you have had, your ancestors have had on the societies of old. And there is yet another to mention, which is Nugwa. Nugwa is the Taoist representation of the Naga, and she's featured on the ancient painting, intertwined on an ancient painting. Another Taoist connection to this, even that I neglect, where she's intertwined with Fuxi, another Taoist Naga, on a work from the Tang Dynasty, which we mentioned earlier, because it was the same dynasty during which Journey to the West occurred. Your ancestors had a profound effect on all these ethnic groups throughout Asia, East Asia, and the Indian subcontinent alike, and of course Africa, and of course the Middle East. But you've left a trail of legends in your wake.
The Torah also tells us that a prehistoric man named Hinuk walked with Elohim, and that they took him. Once again, I need another video to break down what we can know about who or what Elohim actually is. There is a book named for him, yet not included in the Tanakh. Even if you don't believe in the book of Hinuk being legitimate or real, it remains significant that Israelites, or Yatsaralim, as they should be called, might have believed this book to be true, true enough that to them it could have been a genuine or realistic account from Hinuk. We at least have reason to believe that's the case. The book's oldest parts are dated to no earlier than the 4th century BC, but there's reason to suspect it's older on the basis that different fragments of it have been found in disparate languages. All that said, what Daniel described about watchers and what Moshe narrated about creation and the flood, all of those things correlate with what Hinuk explained about watchers. Among the watchers, there were chiefs of over hundreds, chiefs over 50s, and chiefs over 10s. These chiefs apparently taught mankind things they weren't supposed to teach.
I don't consider Sefer Hinuk to be authentic, and what I mean by that is I don't actually believe that the book of Enoch was written by Enoch. I know that some people do. In fact, a lot of black Hebrew Israelites believe the book of Enoch is genuine, number one. and number two, that it was actually written by Enoch, which I feel like is incredibly unlikely. But there are also some legitimate reasons to suspect that it is not written by Enoch. However, I will point out that it is still an excellent indication of what Hebrews of a certain time period thought. They thought it would be these would all be authentic things for him to say.
Yekon is responsible for leading the other watchers astray with the idea of impregnating women.
Yekon, this is a name that also appears in Dragon Ball Z. Yakon. He's an enemy in Dragon Ball Z, a demon of light. And we'll deal with light and darkness and what that dichotomy actually means in another video.
And Ashbael taught them how to do it. Watchers actually doing that shows up in the Tanakh. We'll do a separate video on that. Gadriel showed peoples of the earth more efficient ways to kill, and also showed peoples of the earth the art of war. He's also the one said to have deceived Adam and Hawa in the Garden of Eden.
So Gadriel is the dragon in Bereshit, the dragon of Genesis, the dragon that led astray Hawa and Adam. That was Gadriel. There's no mention of Lucifer. There's no mention of Satan. We'll talk about what both of those things are in other videos, but you don't see any mention of them in connection with this dragon. We do see Sefer Chanukh mentioning that it was Gadriel, and Sefer Chanukh is much more credible on that subject, in my opinion, than the New Testament is, because they're not agreeing. You realize that? This book of Enoch doesn't agree with what John the Revelator has to say.
Which is obviously a narrative established in the Tanakh. Now, Fenimue. I've been building up this whole time to try and get you to understand who Fenimue is and what the significance what significance he holds to everything I was talking about at the beginning. Fenimue taught human beings, according to the book of Hanok, he taught human beings the esoteric wisdom of Elohim, which is the whole point of our focus today. He taught humans the esoteric wisdom of Elohim, including the art of writing, which Hanok said led people to transgress by confirming or insisting on their honesty by making a record of what they say. Let me just read that real quick. He's the fourth watcher of this rank to be named. Chapter 69 of the Book of the Watchers, which is the first section of the Book of Hanuk. Chapter 69, starting at the end of verse 8, going into verse 9. And the fourth was named Fenimue. He taught the children of men the bitter and the sweet, and he taught them all the secrets of their wisdom. And he instructed mankind in writing with ink and paper, and thereby many sinned from eternity to eternity and unto this day. For men were not created for such a purpose, to give confirmation to their good faith with pen and ink. For men were created exactly like the angels, to the intent that they should continue pure and righteous, and death, which destroys everything, could not have taken hold of them. But through this their knowledge they are perishing, and through this power it is consuming me.
Fenimue ensnared mankind with this practice of writing. The author is saying, by writing you are creating this static authority outside of the self that anyone can refer to at any time and use it to buttress what they are saying, to confirm what they are saying. We see that done with the Bible all the time. We're constantly seeing that really scripture gets used to mean whatever we want it to mean. That's the primary problem with scripture. Of course, we can then debate and use process of elimination to get rid of the least logical ideas and eventually arrive at some somewhat concrete conclusions on the most important aspects of scripture. But the fact that we even have to do that demonstrates what the problem is here. The Bible actually defeats its own purpose by being written, such that people are constantly taking it out of context. You can take it out of context because it exists outside of context, technically. Anything that is written is technically somewhat removed from its context because of time. Whatever the situation was in which it was written, it's not being read in that situation anymore, right? It's being consumed by someone in any situation, and the author cannot control for that. If the author of Sefer Chanukh understood this, that would be some esoteric wisdom perhaps. They understood this even in the ancient day to be kind of like a form of, I guess you could say, magic. I've been a writer my whole life and even made a career as a writer. My Hebrew astrological house is Naphtali as well, meaning I'm good with words. We'll go over Hebrew astrology another time, but suffice it to say, as you can see, there is definitely a lot going on here with some spiritual connections that are hard to explain another way. And one could argue that I've connected a bunch of things that I've only been able to connect because people wrote them all down and I exploited that in some way. But these connections exist, whether I speak them or not. You can take it all with a grain of salt, but eventually you have to consider the ideas that you're being confronted with. You have to consider them even to dismiss them.
The esoteric wisdom Finamue imparted to humans included this, but wasn't limited to this. So what the question is, what other esoteric wisdom do you think we would have learned from him? Well, not to oversimplify, but there is such a thing as Western esotericism. Western esotericism is already a thing in Western thought. It has its own Wikipedia page. It includes the Hermetic principles. It includes Cometicism. It includes Gnosticism. It includes astrology.
You gotta shed the skin of the oppressor and don the new skin of the old world. Come out of the new thought. Kill your inner European and revive your ancestors using yourself as a vessel.
Life isn't just about passing on your genes. We can leave behind much more than just DNA. We need to pass the torch. We have all the magic of the digital age to do that with. Building the future and keeping the past alive are one and the same thing.